Hi, I'm Bill Johnson, and this is finally a decent podcast where we talk about what God can do and has done through his people. There was a season where pornographers, pornography kingpins, sex shop owners were on the run. One of the reasons why was our guest today, Patrick Trueman, former head of the Child Exploitation and Obscenity Enforcement Section in the Justice Department in Washington, D.C. I hope with Pat to revisit that time in our history when anti-pornography forces were on the move in our country. Pat, I really want to welcome you today. We haven't had a chance to talk for a long time, but there was a day where we were having many such opportunities.
No question. We talked often and visited often. You came to my office in Washington. I came up to see you.
We certainly did, and in fact, what you stated there, that you actually remembered that very early on as you started in your position there in Washington D.C., there was a person by the name of Dar Vander Ark and myself. We met with you and Rob Showers, and that would have been, is that right? That was right, Rob Showers. Yes, and I think I believe it was 1987. Does that sound about right?
That sounds right to me. It was the first year I was in that position. I was the deputy to Rob Showers.
Well, that was quite a time as we contrast with where we are today. But I'm really we may even do this again if you'll be willing to. But on this initial visit with you, at least, I'm wanting to talk about some of that history because it was such a different time, wasn't it, Pat?
Yeah, quite a different time. Actually, we were in pretty much the same situation we are today, but then a couple of brave people, President Reagan and Attorney General Meese, decided to change that. And they set up the prosecution office, and the rest was done by a group of prosecutors.
Pat, I think did you come out of Minnesota? And so you were involved in some kind of ministry, I think, out there, or some kind of level of activism. And give us a little background as to how it was that you got handpicked for such a high position.
Well, the ministry that I was in, I was the head of Americans United for Life. It's still a large anti-abortion group. And it was headquartered in Chicago. I graduated from law school in early '76, but through law school, the last couple of years, I was active in the legal effort against pornography. And then I went to a law firm in Minnesota, and but ended up in Washington, D.C., at the Justice Department, and I was the deputy, as I mentioned earlier, in this section, the number 2 person, but the head of the section left fairly soon after that, and I became the head of this prosecution section. It was a new section set up because we had so many complaints at the Justice Department from mothers saying they lost their son to pornography, and wives saying they'd lost their husband to pornography. There was a lot of damage, much like we're seeing today. It's much worse today, but much like today. And so people came to Ronald Reagan, the president, and said, we have to do something about it. And he did. He ordered the attorney general to prosecute these crimes.
Now, Ed Meese was a wonderful person to be in that position for such a time as that as well. I believe that's correct, isn't it, Pat? Wasn't that your feelings as well?
Well, that's my feeling for sure. Mm-hmm. He was a man of action, and he knew how to get it done. And he had prosecuted pornography as a head prosecutor in a county in California. And so he knew what he was doing.
Now, another thing that, of course, had happened that was very instrumental was the whole matter of the Attorney General's Commission on Pornography, which was also quite a time in the history of our country. And one of the highlights of that, of course, was that thankfully that we had the voice and the personhood of Jim Dobson on that commission. Express your thoughts on that, if you would.
Well, Jim Dobson was the most outspoken person in the country against pornography. And when Attorney General Meese and President Reagan established a commission to study the harmful effects of pornography, we were very fortunate, he was appointed to that, along with another several individuals. And they studied pornography and even changed the views of many of the commissioners, some of whom were not opposed to pornography. But they changed their views because they could see what harm had been caused from several hearings on pornography held around the country. And then I would mention that people were told, if you'd like to express your views, write to the Justice Department. And we got more than 100,000 letters from people around the country telling us what their views were on pornography. And I had the privilege of having those letters put into my office at the Justice Department. And so I read through several thousand of them. And that's where I got my education on pornography. It wasn't an issue with me. I was not a viewer of it.
Interesting.
But seeing that, I could see it was devastating our country.
That's incredible. And, even as we talk about this today, I'm also bringing this up, and we'll discuss this later in our time together here, hopefully, as to, I had an individual recently say, could it be that we would once again have a presidential commission in our day? But keep that thought in your mind. I'll be interested to see what you think about that. But the whole matter of the Attorney General's Commission on Pornography was getting public publicity by the likes of Dobson on his focus on the family, as he would quite often go on the air and lift up the concerns that he had, what his findings were, as much as he could at that time. But there was also, and I'm sure you'll remember this, was also the Michael McManus, who was a syndicated columnist, and he was reporting on this on a regular basis. So the issue was being talked about in a day, in a time when little was being said about that. And like you say, it's kind of like today, where it seems like pornography isn't even discussed as an issue. Your thoughts?
Well, that's right. What turned the tables back then, Bill, was that the pornography industry felt they had a free ride. So they would buy up mailing lists from all these magazine companies, wherever they could get it, and they would send these very explicit, multiple-page brochures with pictures from the porn videos that they would sell. And these were advertisements for the individual consumer to buy videotapes, which were prominent at that time. So they would send them to children, kids who subscribed to children's magazines. They would send them to women, to adults, adult men. And people put up a hue and cry about this. They didn't want this in their mailbox, but it was in every mailbox. And so whether you were a consumer of pornography or not, you were viewing it because the porn industry was pushing it on you. And that caused people to be very upset. And it really aided the Commission on Pornography, which ruled that so many problems were caused by pornography, breakup of marriage, and much more. Today we know that it leads to sex trafficking and to prostitution. And the Commission then urged that the Justice Department prosecute illegal pornography because it was a federal crime. It hadn't been prosecuted in years, but the Justice Department, they said, should enforce those laws. And and Jim Dobson got on that and urged all his listeners to write the Justice Department. And so it did happen. Prosecutions took place all around the country.
Yeah, that is incredible, and so the folks were talking about it, and then of course Dobson served on that commission for, it was either 12 or 14 months, and I remember one of the things that he wrote, that it was like perhaps, or I think it didn't even say perhaps, the most difficult a period of time in his ministry career. Some of the just the whole experience, I'm going to presume the spiritual warfare Do you remember him speaking that strongly?
Yes, I do, because the commission actually watched some of these films and looked at the magazines that were available through these mail order businesses and in your grocery stores, drugstores, etc. And they were really turned against it because of just what is out there. The porn industry has always pushed to the max, and they pushed themselves off a cliff in that instance.
So it is interesting. It's certainly it was a different season back then, and of course Dobson, along with Jerry Kirk, created a movie called The Winnable War. It was a 60-minute film. I know very well because I got affiliated with the AFA at that time, and American Family Association, and I was able to, Donald Wildman gave me a 60-minute movie on the big reel, the 16 millimeter, and I remember flying back with this in hand, and I showed that all around the state of Michigan over the course of a period of time, and that was a time when churches didn't have, there wasn't no such thing as a DVD player, so it was quite a thing to be able to see this movie for yourself, and it drew a lot of people into the concern, as I was able to show it that way. But I go back to the whole matter of the winnable war. At that time, that was a pretty big statement. But I believe that Jerry Kirk and Jim Dobson really felt that it was a winnable war. When it came out with that title, what were your thoughts, Pat? Was it a winnable war in your eyes?
Yes, I was working in Congress at the time that came out. I was chief of staff to a congressman, and the name escapes me, but there was a California congressman very much opposed to pornography and a real leader on this. He gathered a group of us chiefs of staff, and in a room where he showed this video with Jim Dobson and called The Winnable War. And the theme of it was, look, you're bothered by pornography in the grocery store and the drugstore when you bring your kids in. You're bothered by pornography because it's stolen one of your children who got involved in pornography, or your husband. You're getting mail order requests with explicit video brochures. Do something about it, because we can. We can stop this if the public is with Jim Dobson and will take the next step. It's a winnable war, he said, and it was.
And so there were victories. And so as in your work, you also, I don't know how many attorneys you've had, prosecuting attorneys, or what their titles exactly were, but you had a pretty good cast of prosecutors with you. Talk about your team.
Well, we did. Early on, when the Attorney General Meese established our section, he brought a few prosecutors over to it, and then we hired the rest. But one thing that Attorney General Meese did, which was very brave, he told every one of the 94 U.S. attorneys, these are the head of federal prosecution offices in the various states. Every state has a U.S. attorney, some have more than one, and they all have a large staff. So he told every one of those 94 U.S. attorneys appointed by the president, I want you to bring 2 people from your office to Washington, D.C. to learn how to prosecute pornography and to commit to prosecuting it. And so this large group came to Washington, D.C., and we held like a 4-day or 3-day conference on the problem and showing them clips of what is out there and the number of children who are being affected, et cetera, and all the problems that the commission had identified. And then from that point on, he told everyone as they left, I want to see every office prosecute illegal pornography. So we spearheaded that office, that effort through our office. And so we would have cases all around the country. And the way we would work those, everybody was all worried about how are we going to cover the whole country? And how are you going to get enough law enforcement to investigate these crimes? Well, we had an ingenious way of doing that. We needed FBI agents, but there's only so many that could do this. And they had some reluctance to do the investigations. So we told local law enforcement sources around the country, your police departments, your sheriff's departments, that we are going to do a pornography case or several in your jurisdiction, and we would like you to appoint a police officer or a deputy sheriff that we could deputize federally. So we would deputize them as U.S. Marshals, and they would help the local FBI to go out and investigate these crimes, the porn shops that were prevalent, and then some of your big mail order companies. So we ended up with lots of law enforcement. Now, why would they do that? Why would a police department give up one of their police officers, or a sheriff give up a deputy? Well, we promised them what we call forfeiture. And the way the law works is, when you commit a crime, you not only get a jail sentence, but you likely get a fine. But on certain crimes, the Justice Department can come in and require you to forfeit the ill-gotten gain from your crime. So the pornography industry was making multiple millions, and they would put that money in buildings to build up their empire. They put that in cars and trucks to transport their material. They would have big bank accounts. Well, when they lost their case, we would take that material. The U.S. government had the right to have them forfeit all the money, everything that they got. Sometimes we would take their buildings and all their cars and all their equipment. And so they would not only go to jail, they'd lose everything. And then we would turn that into cash. And we would give that, share that money between both the federal government and the local sheriff's office or the police department. I remember flying out to Los Angeles with a U.S. attorney from Florida who was using the Los Angeles Police Department to help investigate crimes of obscenity. And we brought a $1 million check. Ken Sakai was the U.S. attorney. $1 million check out to the chief of police of the Los Angeles Police Department. And so we had a big ceremony. The U.S. Attorney's Office was there, lots of law enforcement, and gave them $1 million, which was a lot of money. And so we were quite popular with the sheriff's offices and the police departments around the country, and they were quite willing to do these cases. That's how we were able to do cases everywhere: Los Angeles, Las Vegas, Minneapolis, New Jersey, all around Florida, all around the South, etc., Montana. And because always we had enough law enforcement, and of course we had the U.S. Attorney's Office in the local area, and then my office would put one of our prosecutors on the case, someone who has lots of experience in winning obscenity cases. It all worked very well, and it lasted, about 6 or 7 years before it was all shut down.
Yeah, and that was an incredible period of time, and so talk about a couple of the major figures that because you'd go after the pornography kingpins, and you were very successful in those court battles. Name one or two.
Well, Reuben Sturman was identified by the Commission on Pornography as the top pornographer in the country. He was organized crime connected. And when he would come into a town like Chicago and whatnot, you had to buy your material from him, or one way or another you could be shut down. And I mean, they bombed. I don't know if it was him, but the porn studio, one of them in downtown Chicago, was firebombed. And this happened around the country. So Reuben Sturman became one of the big kingpins, and there were others just like him. But there was also mom and pop pornographers. One of the big mail order companies was the Brussels, the husband and wife, and they had their son involved. And they were in North Carolina, and that's where they lived, but they had distribution around the country. And we shut them down with the prosecution. And the odd thing was to get away before they went to jail, because they were convicted, they fled to Canada. And it so happened that they were moving all their personal belongings to Canada in 2 big moving trucks. And when they got to the border with the U.S. and Canada, we got a call saying that it appears that this couple who owns these two moving vans full of everything that they own, that they were convicted of a crime, and that Border Patrol wanted to know what that was all about. And we told them, hold those trucks. And we ended up selling every item in there, and they were begging us to give us their children's clothes and grand pianos and all this. So if you were a pornographer in America, you didn't escape. And I wish the Justice Department would have had the courage to keep this up. We never lost a trial, ever. And because jurors are willing to convict. And why? Well, because they have a three-part test. They have to follow the law, but also jurors are asked whether this material on these films, oftentimes which they're shown in the courtroom, whether this represents their community standards. That's part of the test. And no juror wants to admit that their community is so run down and filthy that what is shown on these films represents their community. So if you were a pornographer in America, your number was up, and we would actually have, once we would begin a grand jury investigation on a particular pornographer, sometimes those pornographers would send their attorneys in saying they want to plead guilty right away because they'd get a lesser sentence than if it went to trial.
Now, along the way, there was the effort at the federal level, but it was also in helping to enable local anti-pornography groups, even state AFA chapters like ourselves. And so that was also a real learning education because there was this momentum that was taking place. And we as leaders in our own states were equipping and challenging and encouraging local communities and local prosecutors to enforce the law against obscenity. And so across the country, basically over the course of those several years where there was great success, we also found, though, the politics at the local level that prosecutors, the local prosecutors in local counties across the country, there was a reluctance to prosecute obscenity, even in the midst of that climate. Can you speak into that as to what some of those reasons were?
Well, one reason is the lack of resources. Some of these prosecution offices are, the DA and one assistant, or just a couple of them, and they've got an area where there's crime. These cases can be prolonged and they can be expensive and very difficult. I remember going out to a town in Kansas where the local representative of American Family Association was trying to get the prosecutor to prosecute. And I sat down with the prosecutor and the woman assistant in the office to try to encourage them to prosecute, and said that we'd help with the prosecution. And they argued that there's nothing wrong with pornography. In fact, the woman prosecutor said, my son works during the summers in high school at the local porn shop. So you can't overcome that. And you don't want them prosecuting because they'll throw the case. If they don't have the right attitude, they'll throw the case. So not every office is equipped to do it, and not every office wants to do it. We had the blessing of having both the President of the United States and the Attorney General of the United States demanding that we do the job. And we were quite happy to do it. But I'll say this, with respect to our work, doing these prosecutions around the country, I don't think we could have been successful at all, Bill, without you and all the other people who were encouraging the prosecutors, the local prosecutor, the federal prosecutor, to do these crimes, and also turning the people into educated people on the issue of pornography. So your local jurors are picked from your local community, and they were already many times educated on the harms of pornography because of what you did. That helped enormously.
Yeah, this cooperation from the national level and the President Reagan and then President George H. Bush followed, and so there was the continued efforts by way of the federal of you folks to be able to still enforce the law. And so the wave of communication, education, community standard, it would appear very strongly that great progress was being made. And I think that there were people like myself that were quite naive about the changing of the guard. And so when Bill Clinton came into office and George H. Bush lost the second term around, explain what happened and the repercussions of that you began to see almost immediately, and then take a look at that even from the standpoint of the few years after Bill Clinton.
Well, what we said, the prosecutors in our office repeatedly, if you want to avoid a flood of child pornography, all you have to do is stop prosecuting adult pornography, pictures and videos, etc., of adults. And here's why. If you have, it's the old broken window theory of law enforcement. When a window is broken by someone, you get that repaired and you arrest the person who broke it. Otherwise, that person will go on to commit many more crimes because they know the law enforcement's not serious. You have to prosecute the minimum to avoid the maximum. So, when we were prosecuting adult pornography, child pornography was virtually gone. In fact, at the time, the head of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, after our 6 years of prosecuting, said child pornography in America is virtually wiped out. And because no one's going to be distributing child pornography, which has many harsher penalties than adult pornography, if they know that we're going to go after every illegal pornography, adult and child. So when I left and the Clinton administration took over, they decided then and there to stop prosecuting adult pornography. And I was over to my old office a few years after that, and I asked him now, do you ever prosecute adult pornography? And he said, no, we are so flooded with child pornography that we can't even prosecute anything but prepubescent child pornography. So if a girl is 14, 15, 16, and she's exploited in a porn film, the Justice Department wasn't prosecuting it because they just had a flood of prepubescent child pornography. And that's exactly what we had predicted.
And certainly much also occurred as a result of having persons like yourself sit down and not be reappointed to that important position, and they replaced the individuals in the leadership roles on the child exploitation obscenity enforcement section with, how would you characterize it? Liberals, moral weak people?
Well, they were directed, not to prosecute adult pornography. Some of them were very good prosecutors that they put in there in place of me and following that. But when you're told this is what you'll do and not that, you can follow orders. And some of the best prosecutors that I worked with in my time as head of the section, Bruce Taylor, Bob Flores, others, just left the department because they weren't serious about the issue of pornography. And they broadcast that. And guess what? The pornographers understood that. So not long after I left, in the first term there of Bill Clinton, you had the internet come to prominence, America Online, etc. And America Online and some of these others would have pornography and child pornography on their own servers. And that was a violation of federal law. And I went back to the Justice Department and urged them, you've got to prosecute these companies. And they wouldn't do it. And so what happened? The internet just exploded with all this material, and there was no governor on it. No one to say you couldn't do it. And that's why we're in this mess today, because what we know about the tech companies is they just want one thing, and that's money. And they always used to say, guarding your children is not our job. Well, that made them money because the more people that were on their servers devouring child pornography and all the adult pornography, the more they could tell the advertisers, hey, we've got all these extra people. They stay on our servers these many hours. And so they got rich by selling advertising and on the backs of exploited children and adults.
That must have been an heartbreaking period of time for you. I can't even imagine, the anguish that you must have had, the great sorrow as you began to see the great faltering occurring at that level and its impact upon our country even right away.
Yeah, I mean, we went from a red light to a green light, and it was just a tragedy. And so, what do you do when the floodgates are open and you have all these boys? Believe me, they're all getting pornography at very early ages. I mean, I've had some parents say, "Well, not my boy. I'm sure he's a good kid. We've raised him in church and whatnot." The unfortunate thing is now it's so prevalent, every family has to deal with pornography. So we get them now at a young age involved in pornography, and that's training them. That's the training ground for sexual exploitation. That's training them to exploit what are they like in college and afterwards. And we have a situation today where a lot of young people aren't even getting married because they're married to pornography.
Along the way, and I don't know what year this was, Pat, but you'll know probably even the question I'm going to be asking you. But along in that period of time, you wrote an article. I don't know what publication, Wall Street Journal or whatever it was. The battle is lost, or the battle is over. The battle is over, and the pornographers have won.
Yes, we always called it the war on pornography, and my article, I think it was in the Washington Post, was the war on the war on pornography is over, pornographers have won. And I detailed in there how the Justice Department forfeited. They would no longer prosecute, and the pornographers took that as a green light, and they moved from the advertisements that they used to send to people in the mail to the internet. And so at the dawn of the internet, pornography dominated the internet. It was all over. And so the pornographers won.
Also, Pat, I know I was involved with this just to a very small degree. At least had my ear to the sounds of the day. But when there were efforts by some of the larger organizations, anti-pornography organizations. You would have been involved in that too, in terms of trying to have regulations on internet pornography, and that was probably a losing battle right from the beginning. But there were efforts, and I think sometimes people wonder why wasn't something done. But there were efforts done, and if you could speak to that, I think that could be very helpful.
Well, one of the things, a few years after I left the Justice Department, the organization called Morality and Media, headquartered in New York, was on the decline, and I was asked to come in and be the president of that organization, and I changed the name to National Center on Sexual Exploitation. And we went after some of these common companies that got involved in the porn business, like Hilton Hotels and all the hotels. They would sell you pornography in your hotel room. And so we put together what we used to call the Dirty Dozen list. I'm still on the board of directors of that group, but I headed it for 14 years. And we would go after a company like Hilton Hotels and get all our people and as many other organizations as we could to contact them by email or phone to say, get out of the porn business, and here's why. And we would put out the phone numbers and the emails of the top executives. So people began contacting those companies. Hilton got out, and then all the hotel chains followed suit. And it was the same with several other companies that were just mainstream companies that were involved in pornography. And that helped a lot. So then we turned our attention to the tech companies and began to work with Google, which originally rebuffed us. Google, of course, was a prime source of pornography because you could search and find it right away, and they had it on their own servers. And etc. So a lot of these mainstream companies were convinced eventually of the harms to their own children, as well as all children and adults. And it was a harder battle with companies like Facebook and Apple and some of these others. But eventually, we're turning to a different world here, bit by bit, as people in America have awakened to the harms of pornography. And we've gotten Congress, the U.S. Congress, to pass several laws which now are governing these tech companies. And I think that, the future is somewhat bright, even though the zeitgeist in the tech companies is still money is king.
So when we look at the full landscape over this period of time that we're talking about here, the message regarding pornography, letting it slip in like it did initially and then explode in, what does that say about pornography?
Well, there's a lot of people that would deny that pornography is addictive, and what I would say to the people who spend several hours a day on it, and even at work and when they get home from work at night, etc., is try living without it for 30 days. And you'll find that if that isn't an addiction, that they can't live without it, then I don't know what is. But, you get some scientists to say, well, technically it's not an addiction. Well, it's a compulsion that drives you day in, day out. People prefer pornography to marriage, to spending time with their family, etc. It upsets work. It causes divorce. It's just a drug, so this keeps people involved in pornography, and we have to just continue to educate people and to get parents to recognize that they're going to have it in their family. So how do you prepare your children who will inevitably see pornography, whether it's on their computer, at home, neighbor's computer, on HBO, where there's a lot of pornography. All these streaming services will have, almost all will have pornography on them now. It's very commonplace. You've got to prepare your children. It's no longer possible to prevent your children from seeing it. But once they get involved as young children, and if they don't get help, they'll spiral into prostitution. They'll get involved in it as a married person. It'll destroy their marriage, etc. Pornography is devastating when you consume it.
If you had to do it all over again, would you allow yourself to be in such a position as the head of the Child Exploitation and Obscenity Enforcement Section?
I thought it was the best job I ever had because, I used to work in the area in a charity providing or trying to prevent abortion. But with the Justice Department, you not only can tell people not to do it, like the pornographers, you can put them in jail. And so it's pretty good work. And if the Justice Department had continued that, we wouldn't see the society that we have today. We've broken down the morals of this country, and morals is now a bad word, but people understood back then, even pornographers understood, that it was something that could break down a society. And the Supreme Court, in case after case after case, recognized that, and all the laws on pornography were upheld. So here we are today with it, where it's a free-for-all, and sex trafficking is the natural outgrowth of pornography. If you could shut down pornography, you would automatically shut down sex trafficking and prostitution in the world.
Now, early on, you spoke about we were talking about the possibilities of once again, or the contrast with the times then, where nothing was really being said about pornography, and it was on the move, and it was exploding. And so Ronald Reagan stepped in, Ed Meese, and individuals like yourself, Alan Sears, and the movement mushroomed across the country. The public rose up, woke up, spoke out, and enforced laws and so forth. And you could see the positives that were occurring in a climate like we're living in today, with a leadership of President Trump. Could it possibly be? Could you see a move such as that, or do you think? What are your thoughts?
Yes, you could, but it wouldn't be as easy to do as it was then. I mean, when you had an attorney general who said every office is going to prosecute, here are the resources, that was somewhat easy to do. But now, I don't know that you could start like we did in big cities like Los Angeles, Las Vegas, Newark, New Jersey, etc. If I were to advise the Justice Department and they were willing to do prosecutions against hardcore pornography, I would advise them, pick out 5 jurisdictions in the country and start there. We started with a great number of cases, but just pick out 4 or 5 jurisdictions. So you might pick North Carolina, you might pick Michigan, you might pick, a southern, like Alabama or places like this. And you begin to see that people are still willing to convict on pornography because they don't have their own choice when they become a juror to do whatever they want. There's a strict 3-part test, and you have to follow that test, and you take an oath before God, before you become a juror, to follow the law and apply the facts. You don't get to just do what you want. So you begin in a few jurisdictions, not necessarily all easy jurisdictions. You might pick Minneapolis, etc. But the point is, you get convictions. And then that emboldens other districts. So next year you pick 5 more. And the next year you pick 5 more. Pretty soon, the public is educated through lots of criticism, but lots of good success, that there are harms to pornography. And you would find that there would be an army of people who would rise up, like happened when I was there, to support what those prosecutors are doing.
So one of the things too that you I'm sure grew to recognize, and certainly I did too, it's still a matter of convictions. So on a local level, you can go to a prosecuting attorney in a Saginaw or a Flint or perhaps even in Detroit, and you can make the case, and you can have people that express concern highly, to this individual. Yet at the same time, you can find out that the pornographers are even at work there, where they're putting money behind the candidates to ensure that they don't prosecute. In addition to that, it almost takes an ideologue at the local level to be able to say pornography is wrong. I will do everything I can to have my office go against this. Those are factors as well, are they not?
Yes. If you were to get a local prosecutor who would do these cases, and I don't know why in some jurisdictions they don't, but it's a different landscape today because there's not porn shops all over. People rarely go to a porn shop when they can get it on the internet. But if you had a community with a porn shop, therefore the local prosecutor has jurisdiction where they wouldn't on an internet crime. But they do if it's a porn shop in your neighborhood, etc. You could get the public to rally behind that prosecutor to do the case. We always relied on the public. And Bill, you were instrumental so many times in coming to meetings and encouraging others around the country to get involved in this war on pornography, and that emboldened all of us in public office.
Now, as we're moving more and more towards closing, you're a Christian, and I know that when you were in that position and you had the attorneys underneath you, I recall, because we did have a Michigander that was also on your team, that had been William Wagner. And so Will, as you probably know, is still very much involved in spiritual fight and war in Michigan and throughout the world, basically. But the point I'm making is that the fight is a war where where you are recognizing that even with good men, you did not want your team to be looking at pornography themselves. Isn't that correct? I mean,
Yes, that's
you had
certainly correct. I mean, this is a spiritual battle. There's no question about it. So the pornography, when you brought a case against the pornographers, you probably picked 5 to 10, maybe a few more, of their videotapes that were pornographic, and you would indict based on those, several of them. Now we didn't. We encourage the prosecutors, don't sit around and look at those dozen videotapes. You can just get a snippet of them. You can look on the box that contains those videotapes. It'll tell you everything you want to know. It's just filth written all over it. And but you don't have to see the whole thing, and you don't have to show the whole thing to the jurors. You might show part of it, and you warn them in advance just to get them on your side. But the other thing is, we had law enforcement that, and their job was to view it and write up a report about it. So you had the report, and then you could perhaps watch a snippet of it. But we did have trouble with one prosecutor that consumed so much of it and spent his spare time doing that. And that guy was kind of a lost cause. He ended up being thrown out of the Justice Department.
well, it certainly speaks to the degradation, the damaging impact of pornography. I think that is still being underestimated by the regular person, a mom or a dad or a grandma or grandpa or whatever the age goes. This is powerful stuff. And all that's been expressed here is such an evidence of that, because it started, I'm not saying simple or relatively small, but it was projected under your leadership it needed to be halted, or the degradation, the decline of this country was inevitable. Are those too strong of words?
No, I think you're right. And if we continue on this path, I don't know how long God's going to hold back his hand. But when you look at the issue of pornography and you study the effects and you're honest about it, you see how much devastation it causes in the soul of an individual, in marriages, in our society at large. We have become a hardened society in so many respects, but for a good part of it, pornography is at the core as one of the factors that is leading to the downfall of our country.
And so, and as we do move really close to closing now, Pat, from the standpoint of being a Christian, a godly man, how were you able to stay strong in your stance and in your seeking to be pure?
Well, I, of course, a lot of prayer and whatnot, but I've got an interesting story that personally happened to me. I was talking to someone, and they asked a similar question: how do you avoid this, and how do you keep from being polluted by all this? And I said to that person, and with some arrogance perhaps or pride, I said, I just seem to have a gift that keeps me from falling into this sin. And I heard in my soul a voice that said, you don't have a gift. I am your gift.
Wow.
And, I realized this isn't Pat Trueman.
Mm-hmm.
This is God that can keep me walking a straight line, which you have to do. And one thing we did in our office at the Justice Department, we talked about this a lot. And, of course, we had male prosecutors and female prosecutors, and we would talk about the harms of pornography and how we want to avoid it. And, our line prosecutors would emphasize that when you're on travel and whatnot, even though you have a briefcase full of this material that you're going to walk into court with, don't spend your time in the hotel room looking at that. That one person that I mentioned didn't listen to us, but the whole office, except for that one person, was on our side, realizing this is harmful, stay away from
Would you say, is there to somebody listening out there who might be wondering if, we need to get a new commission going? Do you have any counsel for anybody like that? Is there anything that anyone that you can do or I can do to just put a bug in somebody's ear at a high level that might pick up this charge, or have some kind of a writing campaign, that to a high place that we get people start to thinking about this thing and initiating such a commission?
Well, Bill, the reason we had the last commission and we had all that good success in prosecuting for 6 years was because Morality and Media in New York City, the group that I headed before I just retired, called it under a different name. But the head of that, Father Morton Hill, decided that with Reagan in office, we had an opportunity. And he set up a meeting with a lot of good leaders, both ministers and also a couple of leaders like yourself around the country, to meet with President Reagan and the various cabinet members, including Attorney General, and made the case that pornography is harmful. There were others in Congress that, like Frank Wolf of Virginia and a few others, who opened that door to Reagan, got him to take the meeting. So if you could do that again, people say that this president, Donald Trump, he's got a history behind him that isn't maybe favorable to this. But if he had the right people pushing him, and if someone would take the initiative, then I think that he'd at least listen. And I'll bet this current Attorney General that we have, Pam Bondi, would be a willing participant in a meeting like that, and she's a follow-through person. You'd get some prosecutions.
I think that's a very sound answer. I'd like to ask you if you would pray, if you close us in prayer, if you would, Pat.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Dear Heavenly Father, we are, as a nation, offending you day after day with the pornography that we consume, the sexual shows on television and the movies, and sometimes we don't even think about what we're doing. We're just involved because it's there, and we don't take any action to turn away from it or to complain about it to the sponsors, etc. We ask, Lord, that you would start us anew, turn our attention to you, to your precious Son, to apologize for our sins and to help turn this country back to you. We ask you, Father, to forgive us and give us a new sense of urgency about what is happening in America. And we thank you for giving us the opportunity to participate in turning this country back to you. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.
Pat, wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm so thankful that you were able to join us. Once again, I just want to thank you for your outstanding work that you have done over all those years in ministry.
Thank you, Bill.
And praise God. Let's do this
and
again
praise
sometime.
God for you as well, Bill.
Thank you so much. We'll hope to talk again soon. Take care. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to Finally a Decent Podcast. If you found this episode encouraging or informative, please be sure to follow us on social media and share this episode with others. We hope to see you again when we have another one of these important podcasts. Thanks again for listening.